So good morning. I'm Clarke Englund. I am the Sunday school teacher at New Braunfels Bible Church for the adult Bible class. And as we're continuing with our studies in Isaiah, we're in a section of predictive prophecy, as well as a point where God is declaring how foolish it is to believe in idols. And last week, as we went through, we had the discussion that came to a head as God, through Isaiah, showed how absurd it was to believe in idols, that you would make an idol from a tree, and you would take that same tree and heat your house, you would cook your food, and then you'd bow down to the leftover piece of wood and ask it to save you. And the absurdity of that really struck home. And even the idol worshipers were beginning to say, is this all a lie? And they just didn't realize what was going on and how it would go forward. This week, we're going to look at Isaiah 44, 23 through 45, verse 13. So let's start by reading. And it says, "Thus says the Lord your Redeemer, and he who formed you from the womb. I'm the Lord who makes all things, who stretches out the heavens all alone, who spreads abroad the earth by myself, who frustrates the signs of the babblers and drives diviners mad, who turns wise men backward, makes their knowledge foolishness, who confirms the word of his servant and performs the counsel of his messengers, who says to Jerusalem, you shall be inhabited, to the cities of Judah, you shall be built, and I will raise up her waste places. Who says to the deep, be dry, and I will dry up your rivers? Who says of Cyrus, he is my shepherd, and he shall perform all my pleasure, saying to Jerusalem, you shall be built, and to the temple, your foundations shall be laid. Thus says the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have held, to subdue nations before him and loose the armor of kings, to open before him the double doors, so that the gates will not be shut. I will go before you and make the crooked places straight. I will break in pieces the gates of bronze and cut the bars of iron. I will give you the treasures of darkness and hidden riches of secret places, that you may know that I, the Lord, who call you by your name, am the God of Israel. For Jacob, my servant's sake, and Israel, my elect, I have even called you by your name. I have named you, though you have not known me. I am the Lord, and there is no other. There is no God besides me. I will gird you, though you have not known me, that they may know from the rising of the sun to its setting that there is none beside me. I am the Lord, and there is no other. I form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create calamity. I, the Lord, do all these things. Rain down, you heavens from above, and let the skies pour down righteousness. Let the earth open up. Let them bring forth salvation, and let righteousness spring up together. I, the Lord, have created it. Woe to him who strives with his maker. Let the potsherd strive with the potsherds of the earth. Shall the clay say to him who forms it, what are you making? Or shall your handiwork say, he has no hands? Woe to him who says to his father, what are you begetting? Or to the woman, what have you brought forth? Thus says the Lord, the Holy One of Israel and his Maker, ask of me things to come concerning my sons, and concerning the work of my hands you command me. I have made the earth and created man in it. I, my hand, stretched out the heavens, and all their host I have commanded. I have raised him up in righteousness and will direct his ways. He shall build my city and let my exiles go free, not for the price nor reward, says the Lord of hosts. And so here we have, let me share the screen for y'all as we look through Isaiah 44, 23 through 45. So we have first our context slide. This gives what's going on in history during these last days of Isaiah and into the captivity, because he's writing about the captivity and the return from captivity, no less, which is 150 or more years in front of him. And the summary of our section is God is calling Cyrus. And so that brings us to the first verse there. Really begins as a hymn of praise. And why is creation singing in verse 23? Well, we saw in verse 22 that God forgave their sins and set them free. And in 23 that he redeemed Israel. So creation is singing his praises for all that he's done for his nation, the nation of Israel, his chosen people. And the creation sings out in joy over the work of God. It's reminiscent of Jesus coming into Jerusalem, and the rock, his disciples, cried about why the people were making a fuss. And he says, if the people did not sing out, even the rocks around would cry out as the Messiah rode into town. Well, what does God use as proof that he is the Lord here? And really in verses 24 through 28. Now we see that he made all things. He stretched his hand, he stretched out heaven and made the earth. He expanded or exposed the false prophets. And he made fools of the fortune tellers, the seers, the wise men. And he caused the wise, those who are wise, to be fools. He says, I can carry out predictions, and my prophets will make a prediction, and I carry them out. I'm going to see Jerusalem restored. I'm going to see Judah restored. I'm going to dry up the rivers. And on top of all that, I'm going to call Cyrus. Cyrus will be my shepherd, and I am in charge. I control. I command Cyrus's doings. And we say, well, who is Cyrus? Well, Cyrus is the king of Persia, and he conquers Babylon around 540 BC. And you can read that account in Daniel chapter 5. And we see him walking into Babylon, the capital, and taking over. Let me pull up Ezra chapter 1. So as I pull up Ezra chapter 1, let's read verses 1 through 4. And it says, in the first year of King Cyrus of Persia, the Lord fulfilled the prophecy that he had given through Jeremiah. He stirred the heart of Cyrus to put his proclamation in writing, to send it throughout his kingdom. This is what King Cyrus of Persia says. The Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth. He has appointed me to build him a temple at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Any of you who are his people may go to Jerusalem and Judah to rebuild this temple of the Lord, the God of Israel, who lives in Jerusalem. And may your God be with you. Wherever this Jewish remnant is found, let their neighbors contribute toward their expenses by giving them silver and gold, supplies for the journey, and livestock, as well as voluntary offering for the temple of God in Jerusalem. And so we see that Cyrus, the king of Persia, he makes the proclamation that he is going to fulfill God's role and send the people back to build the temple in Jerusalem. God gives Cyrus the decision to go build the temple. And if you're familiar with the 70 weeks prophecies in Daniel chapter 9, this is not the command as part of those 7 weeks. This is a separate command. And we see that Cyrus is recognizing that God has given him all the nations of the world to rule at this time. And God is above all, and he not only directs Israel, but he directs a pagan king to preserve his people. And according to the historian, Cyrus was aware of this prophecy in Isaiah and the prophecy in Jeremiah before he actually makes that proclamation and so before he makes the proclamation, he is aware of this prophecy, as I said. And Josephus, in his Antiquities, a secular historian, is the one who has made this known to us and helps us understand what is happening in history back then. So, what does God do for Cyrus? Well, he subdues the nations, and he makes kings fear him, and he opens the gates and the doors to the city. And you can talks about breaking the gates of bronze and the bars of iron. You can actually equate that to his conquest of Babylon and how he marched into the city. God says, he leveled the mountains. He leveled the exalted places, and he humbled the great ones. So all the kings of the Middle East and the regions that Cyrus has conquered all really trembled at his word, and God gave Cyrus treasures galore, and he revealed the secret hiding places and secret treasures. And part of the history of him taking Babylon shows that there were several hidden treasure rooms that were revealed to him, and all the treasures of Jerusalem, amongst other kingdoms, were hiding in there, and the value was just incredible. And we see there are two reasons God gives us in verses 3 and 4 that he does this for Cyrus. And one, he says, so that you will know that I am God. And so he wants Cyrus to know that he alone is God, and that he rules. And it's kind of an extension that he wants the nations to know that he is God, and that he is working through Cyrus. And the second is for Israel's sake. And so that Israel can be free, and they can return from exile and go back home and continue to be his people, his chosen people, and be the light. And we see that God declares that, I called you before you even knew you. I named you before you knew me and before you were king. And in this case, he named him somewhere between 150 and 200 years before he became king. And he declares in verses 5 and 7, he says, I alone am God. And we saw this last week in chapter 44, verse 6. He is unique. I am the first and I am the last. I alone am God. There is none beside me who are God. And God says, I'm going to arm you, Cyrus, for battle. And I will, doing this in such a way that all the world, you will conquer them, and they will know that I am God. And I will make light and dark, peace and chaos, or peace and calamity, through both good times and bad times. And so what he's saying in verse 7, when he says, I create light and dark, I create calm or calamity, this is really a direct dig against the gods of Babylon and Persia. They had the gods of both light and dark, gods of both good and evil, and their understanding was good and evil were equal and constantly at war with each other. And so God is saying, no, there is not an equal to me. I alone am God. And I created good. I created or allowed evil. In this case, he allows evil. And he doesn't create it to hurt people, but he allows it because of people's pride and because of Satan. So he allows it so that people will come to him and that they will know that he is God. And verse 8 is telling us that God brings both physical rain and spiritual rain down. He created the world and he's engaged in it. He created the spiritual world and he's engaged in it. And he brings righteousness and salvation to the world. And he's bringing that peace and that goodness to the world. And verse 9 to 13, then we see with 9 and 10, who's in charge, the potter or the clay? And the obvious answer is the potter is always in charge. The potter molds the clay and uses it to create. The clay doesn't say, make me an ashtray. The clay doesn't say, make me a beautiful vase or an urn. The clay doesn't get a say. Only the potter gets to say what to do with the clay. And the absurdity of trying to say that. But it's also, you see that, kids are saying, babies would say to the father, why did you have me? And the mother, why did you have me? What good is it? Well, the kids don't get a choice in telling parents the same thing. The potter is in clay, the creator is in control. And verses 11 to 13, he's reiterating his role as creator, because He is reasserting that authority as Lord and as Creator. He is in charge. He will both direct Cyrus and he will direct the nations, and he will provide for Israel. So he's reiterating his authority here throughout history. And what is Cyrus's motivation? It does say in verse 13, it says that Cyrus isn't doing this for profit or reward. He's doing this to be God's servant. God had called him to be a shepherd. God had called him to be a servant to his people. And that is Cyrus's motivation. Since we saw that Cyrus knew about the prophecy, Cyrus was accepting of his role in God's production, if you will. Cyrus was willing to be God's servant and literally rejoiced in serving God and knowing he was serving the God of the universe. Well, what are the lessons for today? We've seen this, and really God is the Lord of all. We can't put him in a box. He's going to do things his way. You can't expect him to do things that we might want to do it that way. No one expected, him to pick a pagan king as the redeemer of his people and provide for their return home from exile. And so God will provide his redeemer, and it's not who you might have expected. And we see this with Cyrus in this day and age. And then we see this when Jesus came. The Redeemer, the Messiah, didn't come as the warrior king that Israel wanted. And so they just rejected him. But that was who God's Redeemer was. And we can look at that, and we can appreciate that God uses who he wants. He can tell you the future. He can predict prophecy. He is Yahweh, and Yahweh literally means he causes everything to be. And so that's our lesson for us today. The same is back for them. God is Lord of all, and he is going to provide his Redeemer. It may not be who we might have expected, but he is providing his Redeemer, and we need to look to him to provide that Redeemer. So thank you for joining us this week. Next week, we will continue our studies in the book of Isaiah, and I hope you join us either 8:30 for the Zoom session or online on these YouTube channels later on. So thank you very much for joining us.